We are parents, we are doctors, we are first responders, teachers, and concerned citizens who have found ourselves at a crossroads. We see our freedoms being stripped away, and we can no longer stay silent. We are millions strong, united in a thundering voice and imperative mission that cannot and will not be ignored. We are standing up for the basic human right to raise our own children, earn a living, and make our own medical decisions without the tyrannical overreach that has been forced upon us here in California, across the country, and around the world. We are here to amplify the voices, moving the needle, bringing forth truth, and provide education and resources with tangible tools and expert insights. We are the Unity Project, and this is our podcast. Well, I am joined today by Royce White. Royce is, probably one of the most unique and interesting individuals that I've had the opportunity to meet in this fight. He's also on the Unity Project board. He is a former NBA star as well as current MMA fighter. So welcome, Royce.
Thanks for having me, Laura. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So your background is definitely not linear by any means. Yeah. Tell me, let's start from the beginning.
Yeah.
Let's talk about what brought you. Well, maybe we should start with what you were doing in the NBA. I know that you had called some attention to the Uyghurs and what was happening to the Uyghurs in China when you were an NBA player, correct?
No, that came a little bit later. That was
okay.
That was 2020.
Okay.
After the pandemic, the Big Three had the next time we had a season. That's when I talked about the Uyghurs. My original story with the NBA was that I was one of the few players to get drafted, having spoken publicly about my struggles with anxiety prior to getting drafted. And because of that, there was huge questions during that draft cycle about mental health as a general topic, especially as it pertained to how the NBA community and specifically the NBA front office personnel viewed mental health as a character flaw or as a genuine medical condition. And I was able to still make it through the draft process, even though I was projected skill, talent, and NBA readiness wise to be probably in the top 5 of my draft class. I dropped down to 16. For me, I was just happy to make it to get drafted at all, because given the narrative and the conversation around mental health during that time as it pertained to my draft stock, I was under the impression that it was totally possible I wouldn't get drafted at all for talking about my anxiety prior to the draft. And that kind of preempted me to really question the NBA as a microcosm of the overall global corporate community. And what were the implications of a young person like myself being expected almost to not be forthright about who I was, about the things that I dealt with, and not only the things that I dealt with from a victim, I need special treatment standpoint, but like the things that I had dealt with and triumphed.
Right.
When I came into the league, it wasn't like I had needed special accommodations or anything like that at Iowa State, where I had played my college ball. I had just come off of an All-American level season, right? Where I was, where I put up one of the best rebounding years in Iowa State University basketball history. And I was the only player to lead my team in 5 major stat categories, which is another, almost impossible feat in its own right. So I had proven that I could be exceptionally be very successful and productive with the anxiety that I had been talking about. And upon arrival in the NBA, I was kind of just expected to shelf that part of my life. And that made me ask real questions about the overall culture of the NBA and what the media's role was, and just the perception of athletes and the perception of health, right? And all of those things.
Well, and what's interesting to me is this, how you're articulating it is that as though you were really expected to toe the line, right?
Yeah.
You had to get in there and you had to assimilate to whatever their edict was, it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean,
What were they?
it's completely paternalistic organization, and you know, people don't see it when they watch from home, but there's a culture that is prominent from a young age for most of the athletes that make it to the NBA that says this is the best possible opportunity you could possibly imagine as a human being in modern society and in modern life. So you must protect this opportunity at all costs, and most of the time that's going to mean that you operate as a somewhat drone-like being and say whatever you need to say, or forego saying whatever it is that you feel you may need to say in order to secure this opportunity and to protect it. And that's what they were telling me. And I mean, so far as they even told me that directly, because we got into all of these, you know, back and forths behind closed doors about policy. And what was the mental health policy of the NBA? Not what was people's opinions, or, you know, what did they hear about it, or what person you knew that might share an issue with the same diagnostical name. What policies were actually on the books around mental health? And when we went back and looked at the collective bargaining agreement, myself and my agent and my doctor, my family doctor, even some of their doctors from the NBA side were shocked to realize there wasn't a single mention of mental health in the entire collective bargaining agreement. Wow. There wasn't a single mention of mental health in the entire agreement. So that shot up red flags in my mind as a 21-year-old, because now I'm sitting there going, it doesn't seem like this is by accident, but I'll play along. I mean, you know, in good faith, I'll play along. Maybe you missed it. You know, maybe we missed one of the core components of overall health that has been known for a long time. I mean,
right.
You know, I'm a Christian, so my belief in the spiritual is very central to the way I view the world. But I'm not one of those people that presumes that the psychological is insignificant, right? I think there is something very, very significant about the human psychology, the human mind, and the effect it has on our overall health. So
yeah, and we're seeing that.
Yeah. So I asked the question, you know, well, what are we going to do about this lack of policy? What can be done? And immediately I was, you know, bombarded with, oh, we can't change the collective bargaining agreement. It's impossible. We'd have to get all the owners to agree to it, to create any addendums. And all these things were said behind closed doors, to where finally I just said, listen, if we can't create a new policy, well, let's go in reverse. I said, first I asked, well, can we create an addendum that would at least acknowledge that mental health is in the same realm with the physical health policies that already exist? Sure. And they said, no, we can't do that. Nobody would agree to that. And their reasoning was because players will fake mental illness and still get paid. I mean, at least that's what they said. Now, you know, whether there were of course there were other motivations to not want to cement that policy that I would figure out later. But at least on face value, they were willing to present themselves as though they would forego any mental health consideration in policy based on monetary considerations alone, which I took offense to from the outset. I'm like, huh? And so then I go, well, okay, if we can't put an addendum in that would create parity between mental health and physical health, how about we create a new mental health policy from scratch? And they were like, no, we can't do that. And so I'm like,
was it just total resistance?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. From the top down. The only people that were open to it actually were the doctors that were on their side of the deal, right? The team doctor, the joint doctor between the players union and the league office, and the psychologist that the team had hired, that I played for, the Houston Rockets. So all of those medical people were in agreement that the league needed a policy and that one was possible, but the league just shut the door off completely.
Wow. You know, it's interesting too. I mean, there's so many parallels to this. And I actually just listened to a little piece of an interview from, I think it's Kyrie Irving, and he was talking about how he basically pushed aside $100 million in a 4-year contract
Yeah,
because of his belief in the vaccine and taking a stand against these vaccine mandates.
yeah.
And I thought, wow, that's so unbelievable. And we should be hearing about those types of stories. We should be hearing about the story that you just went through with the
Yeah.
NBA.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a parallel. And you can look at and here's my thing with the mental health conversation and topic. I sit in a very unique position because when I first started talking about mental health, people were completely ignoring it,
Mhm.
or neglecting it, you could say, and just didn't really take it serious. Now, in short order, the establishment has been able to weaponize the mental health topic and conversation in the
Right,
opposite direction. And
right.
so, I'm torn between the mental health that I know to be important, and the mental health conversation that I know to be true, and what the
Right.
establishment wants to use to basically say all of our political ideology is inextricable from our mental health. So
Mhm.
if you don't accept our political ideology, then you are by
Right.
default harming our mental health, which then harms our physical health. Well, and so that racket is very clear to me. So I'm torn, but the parallels are that the NBA or any of these corporate institutions believe that they
Mhm.
can, when they want to, make the rules up as they go,
That's right.
and that they don't have to be accountable to anybody who's looking on, and
Right.
especially whatever audience that they have a commercial relationship with. And that's what they did to me, and that's exactly what they tried to do to Kyrie Irving.
Mhm.
Although he was already a bit more proven and had a much bigger stake in the basketball community than I
Mhm.
had coming straight out of college. But if they could have, they would have completely gotten rid of and clipped Kyrie Irving out for taking a stand against the vaccine. They couldn't
Sure.
do it, but they would have if they could have.
Right. And I mean, talking about just having these agendas where they set the rules and everybody must willingly comply.
Yeah,
You look at what happened in this country in the last 2.5 years, and I know obviously you're a board member on the at the Unity Project, and
yeah,
obviously this is what we do is take a look at this and take a stand against it. But I mean, look at this country in the last 2.5 years. What has happened? You talk about mental health. Look at the pediatric population, right? In
yeah,
particular, the adolescent population. These kids have been locked out of schools for 2.5 years.
yeah,
And I've said it before in this podcast, but the way I look at it is, one of the things that you do to POWs, we saw this in the Vietnam War. You take an individual, you put them in a box and you socially isolate them, and that breaks the human spirit. So we did to the adolescent population what was done to POWs in the Vietnam War. And it was done incredibly effective in this country, so much so that we have epidemic rates of depression and suicide.
yeah.
And I wonder what the path for recovery for the adolescent population is. I mean, we're no doubt we're going to continue to see problems. I actually spoke to a high school counselor about a couple weeks ago, and she was saying that at the elementary school level, they are now going back and teaching basic cognitive skills to elementary school students
Mm.
because of what's been done over the last 2.5 years.
Well, what's going on right now is a full on coup of um, of the Westphalian system, or the
Mhm.
Westphalian tradition, or America, the American spirit, the American dream, freedom as a concept. I
Mhm.
mean, there's a an outright coup taking place right before our very eyes. And what's hard for people to understand is that the coup has been coming along for a while. This didn't
Mhm.
just happen overnight. It's been building up post World War II, and I think it's very right to use the term New World Order, not in some colloquial, hyperbolic way, but in a very historical based political way. that the post-World War II democratic liberal order that was instituted by the remaining powers, the Allied forces, after Nazi Germany was defeated and after Japan was defeated, is what prevails today. And you know, the authoritarianism that has been wound up and coiled and wrapped in that agenda continues to evade the everyday average American citizen and the everyday average American person in the free world or the modern world from here to Beijing. Because our concept is something like, if we don't submit to a global authoritarian governance, then we're bound to be victims of another Nazi Germany. And they're running they're actually running that exact narrative right now in the conflict with Russia, no matter where you stand on the Russia versus Ukraine issue. But that is the running narrative. And it's a narrative that they've continually run against any national leader, any nation's leader that didn't want to fall in line.
Of course.
Regardless of how you feel about those leaders as individual people and what they had done in their life. And they're two separate issues. I mean, there's who Saddam Hussein was in his life and all of his evil doings. I don't know him personally, and I didn't live in Iraq, so I can't speak to what Saddam Hussein did on a daily basis. But I would venture to believe that there were some heinous things that he was probably involved in. So too has come to be the standard of anybody who rises to the top as the leader of a nation. I mean, we've almost set the deck that way, where if you rise up to be the leader of a nation, you were probably involved in some murky stuff, especially in the Middle East in the mid 80s and 90s. So, but it's not about who Saddam Hussein was. It's not about who Muammar Gaddafi was, who Anwar Sadat or they pick one. It doesn't matter. It's not necessarily about who they were individually in their life when we're discussing the overall trajectory to go from post-World War II to a global governing system or a global governing culture where we stand in a very dire situation now, where we are sacrificing the kids for the adults, right? We're going back to a child sacrifice culture and an earth worshiping culture. And that's pre-Abrahamic, that's pre, that's pre the modern civilized world that we claim we're doing it in defense of. And it's happening right in front of us. And it's scary that the kids could get sacrificed. And there's so many cowardly, gutless adults in our culture that people sat by and go, yeah, no, there's no problem. Just vaccinate all the kids. Makes sense. It's going to stop me from getting COVID. It's going to stop my 75-year-old mother from getting COVID, which it didn't. And now Pfizer comes out today, or I think in the last few days, and goes, the shot doesn't stop human to human transmission, but we were forced to. Right. We were forced to act as we did because of the crisis. And
the crisis, the state of emergency.
We're always a crisis away. We're always a crisis away from, there's always a crisis around the corner. So that'll be the revolving door from now until people grow some balls.
And it's funny because we were actually just talking about this before the podcast, some of the team members here at Unity Project, and we were looking at that new Pfizer campaign. Have you seen this? The one that they're working with Marvel Comics and they're targeting children. And I said, look, this is just yet again another attempt from the pharmaceutical companies, from the government, to circumvent the parents, target children. And to your point, adults were standing by and we're allowing it to happen. And I remember in the very beginning, I used to be so frustrated because this whole talk track of, well, it's for the greater good. We got to get vaccinated or protect the elderly population. And I remember saying in the very beginning, what kind of a civilization is this? All of a sudden, we now put our children out in front. Isn't it supposed to be the opposite? We stand in front of our children. We're supposed to protect our children. And it's funny because it seems like it's really the crux of this whole pandemic. It's always revolved around this agenda to attack the children.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, and actually the two most vulnerable parts of our population, the elderly population, and then of course the pediatric population. And I always said, look, I mean, it's pretty clear. If the vaccine doesn't prevent transmission and acquisition, right? This has nothing to do with public health and safety. And I saw something, and I'd love to get your response to this. I saw something, it's going around, you might have seen it, it's going around social media. There's a guy that's sitting in the emergency room. So he's physically sitting in a chair in the emergency room, and he's got 2 police officers surrounding him. And they're telling him, you need to put on your mask or we're not going to treat you. You're not going to get the medical treatment. You need to put on your mask. And the guy says, I'm having an asthmatic attack. I can't breathe. And you want me to put a mask on? And the police officer responds and says, you don't need to put it over your nose and mouth. You just need to put it by your chin.
I mean, it doesn't shock me. No, it doesn't shock me. And
Right.
you know, there was this entire cohort of conservatives, let's say, who who called into question, you know, because I ran as the America First candidate in my congressional district race this past, you know, couple of months, and I lost in a primary by a margin of 900 votes. But there were plenty of conservatives who called into question my participation in the George Floyd protests. And, you know, they questioned my loyalty to the America First agenda or to the conservative movement because I participated. And I asked the question, I said, when I went to speak at different places in the community and when I was on, you know, national media, I asked the question, where were you? Where were you when George Floyd was killed?
Right.
You all let the government tell you to stay in your homes.
That's right.
Let's not forget that the George Floyd uprising was what broke the initial lockdown, right? Because up until then, people were locked down with panic and uncertainty. And in Minneapolis specifically, I guess you could make the argument that some of the protests that I helped lead broke the initial lockdown spell. And in retrospect, I didn't think about it like that at the time, but I'm proud to have done that at the time. But and I say that only to reiterate, the policing issue in this country isn't about black or white. It's about authority, and it's about the power of the state versus the power and value of your citizenship. And we've allowed the mainstream media to conflate race into the situation and get people all wired about what the real battle is. And the battle is, it really is a state authority versus the rights of citizens. And yeah, it doesn't shock me that the police would bend over and follow marching orders the same way the military would, right? The military, it's a lot of vets, a lot of armed, soldiers and people from our military had courage and said, you know what, I'm not doing this. And they refused to take the shot, and they took the consequences of doing so. And my hat goes off to them. But to the overwhelming majority of what was it, 80% of military personnel that took the vaccine, these are the people that are expected to defend our freedom, our constitutional freedom. I mean, we're at war here domestically. So,
well, even within the military, I mean, there's so much happening right now as far as, you know, this whole clearing of the upper echelon of the military and the leaders of the military, and replacing them with individuals that are willing to be more compliant and fall in line with what this agenda is. And it never ceases to shock me. But, you know, I think about that scenario, and I also wonder, where are the doctors? Like, you should have had the attending ER physician walk out and say, I'm sorry, but I'm going to treat this patient. That's in accordance to my Hippocratic oath, my ethics as a human being, as a medical professional. And of course, none of that happened. And it continues. I mean, it's shocking that it continues to happen, even though we're so far downstream right now of the pandemic. And we know that the quote unquote pandemic is not something that's impacting society, but yet it still seems to be playing a role. But let's talk about you brought it up. So let's talk about your congressional run, if that's okay.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, I ran against, my plan was to run in CD5 here, which is the Minneapolis. And before that, let me go back and clarify some about the George Floyd thing again. When I led these protests, and I guess this is linked to this question as well, because the reason I really ran was what I saw when I was out there in the streets when the George Floyd thing happened. Because before that, I had been to myself. When I fought the NBA, I did it in complete isolation. So I know what it means for the establishment and the establishment media and all of the running dogs to try and, let's say, gaslight a person into believing that they're crazy when they're really asking for or suggesting the most basic and logical thing. And my story back in 2013 is a microcosm of what the mainstream establishment has tried to do to all people who have called into question the last 2 years. And so, after the George Floyd thing, I went to the front line of the uprisings and I said, what are we doing at the police station? Why are you guys at the precinct? We're going to the Federal Reserve. Get behind me. Right. Let's start at US Bank Stadium. How do you people actually believe that these mega arenas get built? I know everybody loves to go and cheer and disconnect from the world and their issues and have a beer and get lost in the fandom. But how do you think these arenas actually get built? Who do you think builds these arenas? Who is it that when you say the whole system is guilty, young white liberal woman with the purple hair or young black man who works at the barbershop or, whoever it is, I'm not picking out anybody in particular. Although the Marxists and the postmodernists and the liberal yuppies seem to have a certain character type, but they're expanding at a rapid rate. When you say the whole system is guilty, who do you mean exactly? Like, who is that system? And so, when I led those protests, I tried to emphasize the prevalence of a corporatocracy and that all of these institutions are linked. And that's not a conspiracy. I mean, if you take one of the oldest sayings that we have in our culture, follow the money. And I don't mean to say it to be cliche, but if you follow the money, you will find the culprits that you mean to indict and rightfully indict. But we can't be selective. And when I saw people being selective after the George Floyd thing from a grassroots perspective, then I started to question what players were at work that had helped disseminate that narrative. Like, for example, why was it that people were so ready to throw down the mask when it came to marching for George Floyd? And you had people out there yelling in the street and, coming close to contact, hugging each other, kissing each other, crying with each other. And then, I look online and the same people are saying, if you don't wear a mask, you're a murderer. You're a murderer. And then it's not that I didn't know, because I came from within the NBA, which is as big a media institution as there is in our country and in the world. I understood it, but I did not know how brainwashed they had your average American citizen until I was in the heart of this uprising. And then I realized that people's brains are completely incoherently scattered across this panoply of issues that they get headlines from. And I try to bring some clarity to it. And then once I got really deep in, I saw the political go-betweens. I saw the Keith Ellisons. I saw the Ilhan Omars for what they were. I saw the Governor Tim Waltzes, who I wrote a letter to in the heart of the pandemic, in the heart of the George Floyd issue, and said, the grandiosity of the federal government is actually undermining the meaning of community.
That's right.
So what is a state governor's role in actually protecting individual state citizens from this wave of federal government? And no response, no response, no response from Governor Walz. But had I come out as an LGBTQ transgender woman and wanted, and it had been an opportunity for Governor Walz to show his LGBTQ demographic that he supports a black man who wanted to become a woman, he would have responded to my letter. He would have shown up in public at the podium and shook my hand and took pictures. And so that I just couldn't stand for. And I was like, I got to run for office. From now until the day I die, it doesn't matter if I win or lose, I got to get involved and run for office.
So who did you end up running against?
I ran against Cicely Davis in a Republican primary. And just to show people how this works. And I just, I hope this is informative, educational for people. Because
absolutely,
I don't mean it to be political, but we live in a hyper political time, right? And it's not, and I'm not saying Republican or Democrat. That's not the issue. The issue really is globalist versus nationalist and authoritarian versus citizen-based free societies. And so just to show you how this works, Cicely Davis is really backed and funded by the same exact people who back and fund Ilhan Omar. I mean, on a technical level. So when you hear people talk about a uniparty, the two parties, the corrupt two-party system, I just experienced it firsthand. Like, I actually know the people behind closed doors who fund and back and strategize for both candidates. And you know, my opponent raised $1 million. She got a like 6-7 month head start on me, but when she first popped out, she was able to raise $1 million something because she was the Black woman who was claiming to be, you know, who draped herself in Donald Trump, who was going to fight Ilhan Omar. And to low information voters, they threw the first dollar behind her because of the caricature or the narrative that has been built about Ilhan. I mean, they've built Ilhan up as such a, it's like this play on narrative back and forth teeter-totter between fundraisers of the party. And so when I got into the race, for example, I had these bundlers come to me. This was probably the most gross thing I experienced during this entire process. I had these third-party fundraising bundlers come to me and say, we can go out and raise you millions of dollars because your opponent's Ilhan Omar. And people really have strong feelings about Ilhan Omar. We could raise you, you know, maybe $15 to $20 million, but the split is 15/85. And I go, okay, you know, 15% for you guys. It sounds like a pretty good handler middleman fee. No, it was 15/85 for them.
No kidding. Wow.
And so what I came to know is that this isn't just in my case with a high profile race like a former NBA basketball player turned America First nationalist populist versus the darling of the far left progressive caucus. This is the normal practice across the entire political spectrum. Right. And so, you know, the Republican Party and their third-party fundraisers have been doing this for a long time, where they take a candidate and they send you emails and physical mail and tell you to donate, and off of $1, they're taking 85 cents and putting it in their pocket. And I told them I'm not going to do it. I said there is not a chance that I would allow you to use my name to steal 85 cents on the dollar from the American people in the middle of a national crisis. And I never actually did end up getting a third party fundraiser because of that. So in money, they've set up a system where money has a huge role in the low information voter and how they turn out at the polls on election day. So we have layer upon layer of corruption that has to be peeled away. And you just have to start with telling the truth, right? And hopefully me telling the truth here about this will make people rethink how they participate as American citizens. So.
Wow, that's incredible. And ultimately, it sounds like you ran a pretty close race.
Yeah, close.
What are your thoughts on what's happening with the election system? You think that had impact?
I think we have to be ever cognizant about the overall integrity of our elections. Now, you know, I'm not well enough versed or an expert enough on how the entire voter system works to say with any certainty what has happened in any past election. All I can say with some certainty, or with a lot of certainty, is that it's very peculiar that in 2016, the Democrats were completely willing to say that Russia was able to influence our election. And then 4 years later, when Donald Trump wins, they say, 4 years later, when Joe Biden wins, they say this is the most secure election that we've had. There's no way that the election could have been tampered with. And, you know, so I think we have to be, because here's the deal. If you live in what people perceive to be a democracy, which we're not, we're a constitutional republic. We practice democracy. We have a democratic process. But even so, if you have what people presume to be a democracy and you can't have fair elections, the inevitable outcome is violence.
That's right.
And so you have to consider that people who want to bring violence about understand that the subversion of elections can do that, is a
Mm-hmm.
pathway to that, and may be exercising that right now. And we always have to be worried about that. So
Sure.
I think the election integrity is a huge issue that needs to be sorted out. Um, I also worry about the pandemic resurging. You know, I saw in
Mm-hmm.
the news a few days back that there's a projection that an entire new wave of COVID will come again,
Mm-hmm.
and this time it'll be worse. And I mean, there's just so much to think about and consider. All I can say
Sure.
is that people need to go out and do their best to act as citizens of this country. First, they need to look
Right.
in the mirror and really evaluate what they believe being an American citizen means.
Mm-hmm.
And then ask themselves what the value of their citizenship is, what it was, and what it has come to be, and let that inform how they vote, right? Do you want to
Mm-hmm.
have more freedom? This was another thing that got to me with the George Floyd thing. If you guys are saying that the entire system is racist, riddled with white supremacy, right? The entire thing is a racist,
Mm-hmm.
white, patriarchal system. Why are you voting for a party that's going to give never ending expansive power to the government?
Right.
I mean, it's just incongruent in every manner. But they're not the problem. The problem are the people who are on the fence, who think that they can
Mm-hmm.
afford to stay out of the fight, who think they can
That's right.
afford to not get involved, who think if they keep their head down long enough and they just live their life, then everything will be okay for them. And it doesn't work that
Yeah.
way. And the pandemic proved that pretty soon. Just as they want to push LGBTQ theory on your kids in school, they're going to mandate, like they did, that your kid gets vaccinated.
Right.
And who knows, next, it'll be monkeypox, it'll be Ebola, it'll be some
Right.
new strain of bird flu or H1N1, or, who
Mm-hmm.
knows? But
Well, I mean, because make no mistake about it, the mechanisms by which this country has been led down this path are very much still in place
yep,
and very much still being used. I mean, in California, we're still technically under a state of emergency. The governor continues to extend the state of emergency.
unreal.
At a federal level, I mean, you've heard the debate. I know Biden botched it and said that he doesn't believe that he believes the pandemic is over. And then, of course, they came right back out and corrected his statement because they know that if we're not under a state of emergency, then every one of these vaccines needs to be pulled off the market because they're still under an emergency use authorization.
Yep.
But more importantly, I think the disturbing part of that is, we still have the pieces of legislature at a federal level, at a state level that exist, and I'm talking about the PrEP Act, that has been the framework that has allowed this country to be led down the path that it has, and do things like locking the country down,
Yeah.
making kids get masked in schools, which I always found to be interesting. That in California, the governor ended the masking mandate, but extended it for school age children. So you can go out and engage in mainstream society as an adult and not wear a mask, but your children have to wear a mask. And at the time, I mean, there was pretty heavy scientific data that showed that children were not vectors of transmission, but yet we're still subjecting them to this form of compliance.
Yeah.
And of course, it's all by design. And to your point, I mean, I think it's very scary. These people who are sitting on the sidelines with their head in the sand, or maybe their head's not in the sand, maybe they know, but they're just unwilling to get involved. At some point, if we continue down this path, people aren't going to have a choice. You're going to
No,
have to
well,
make a decision.
I mean, we hope.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
we would hope we would get to a place where we got to think, and this is for all my Jewish brothers and sisters out there that still have the cultural and genetic memory of the Holocaust. Many people, I mean, the murder happened at the camps.
Mm-hmm.
The murder happened in the camps. The murder didn't happen in the streets of the
Right.
Jewish ghettos. Right. The
Right.
fight didn't happen there. It happened in behind the closed doors and the lies that were
Right.
told to round them up.
Right.
And so that's a scary, same thing with the gulags,
Mm-hmm.
in Russia. Same thing with the camps with Maoist China.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a concerning thing when you look at it historically, because maybe we don't come to a place where people actually get off of the tap and that, so that's the proposition that's before us for sure. And I don't know if it's people's head is in the sand, so much as, I don't know if people are hiding out of cowardice so much as they've just accepted that the material high or
they're comfortable.
The high from the distraction is so good.
Right. Look, we've never in human history had this quality of life as human beings. Never. I mean, you look at historically, you look at whether it was like, 1800s, you look at the medieval times, you name it, even people who were in places of royalty or extreme power in civilizations, they did not live as good as someone who would be even, the probably lowest economic, socioeconomic rung in society today.
Of course.
We as human beings have
reliable water, reliable sanitary bathroom conditions, stable shelter that wasn't in jeopardy from weather conditions. I mean, there's a lot of things and a lot of improvements technologically that we should be thankful for, but ultimately the common thread across the entire trajectory of time is that the lack of faith, or the lack of let's just say the lack of faith in a higher authority and value system always preceded people's being duped by the power structure. And it's no different now. I mean, if you look at what scares me the most is really social media, and just the amount, not just the amount of time people spend on it, but what gets the most attention on it. Right? I would have no problem.
And how they feel.
I would have no problem with people spending all day on social media if they were discussing and thinking about first principles or the fundamental framework of the human condition, or psychology, or faith propositions, or any of those things. But they're watching people eat hot dogs, and they're watching girls get naked, and they're watching they got kids watching kids play video games. I mean, it's out of control.
And not only that, it doesn't even lend itself to being something that would be kind of this forum of discussion and debate. It's a very myopic system where you can say, okay, I like this topic and I'm going to set my filter so I only see this topic. So then that becomes my reality. I was having a conversation with a young person recently who their particular family did not allow her to engage in social media. She finds herself at an age now where she's almost 18. And she says, I'm going to post a picture for the first time. And my question to her was, up to this point, you've existed and your family's done a pretty good job of teaching you that social media is not reality. Tell me why. The question I asked was, why? What do you hope to gain from posting that picture? And I said, if you don't even have to answer me, take that question and think about it for a while. But, of course, what I was trying to do was hopefully see whether this young lady was able to come to the understanding that, like, my question was, why? What do you hope to gain? Meaning, are you looking for validation from people that you don't know, that you don't actually have relationships with? And unfortunately, that's the society that we now live in.
Oh, no doubt. No, I mean, and of course she's looking for validation. And of course, all of us are looking for some validation. It's a validation that used to be considered only important between, or in the ultimate sense, between you and the creator, right? Is that only God can judge you. Only God can fulfill you. And that's something that's been really lost on us culturally. And we've created all these cultural narratives about how Christianity or any faith is just some symbol of patriarchal corruption, tyranny, and white supremacy. So that's one issue. But, the technology piece, I think more practically and fundamentally, is to isolate people so it's much easier to control the possibility of revolt. And so
we've lost community. We've lost our sense of community. I listened to this and I'd love to get your reaction to this or input, but there's a statistic that said something like, and I'm sure I'm not getting the numbers exactly right, but something to the effect of, they say that 60 or 70% of people going into the pandemic, not during, but going into the pandemic, reported that they were extremely lonely. So there's this total breakdown of community, total breakdown of family. And now, to your point, you've isolated people, and now they're using technology as a form of social interaction and validation. And that's that right there is the recipe for the perfect way to control a certain population.
I mean, it's 1984 to boot. I mean, it's almost, and people, you hear people say this all the time, and people just kind of pass over, and it becomes cliche. But at a point, the truth becomes so cliche that people ignore it, and you just kind of sit back and chuckle and go, how do we not see this? Right? Yes, the isolation didn't come with the pandemic. The isolation came with the advent of social media and the loss of physical community, and then at the perfect. And it had a growth model that was insane. I mean, the growth model of social media from a historical human standpoint is probably the single biggest, most widespread growth model of any human invention in history.
Right.
I mean, it made the written press look like, look like a drooling toddler. Right.
Well, yeah. I mean, think about that. So you may be too young. I don't know. Do you remember MySpace? I never used it because
I remember my MySpace. Yeah, I had one.
I personally don't. The only form of social media I've ever engaged in has been LinkedIn, and it's strictly for professional use. I've been a total non-engager when it comes to social media. But so when was MySpace big? Was it 10 years ago?
MySpace was big. Let's see. I got to high school and my freshman year of high school was 2005, 2006. I always say both years because that's how they count the basketball seasons, right? So 2005, 2006 was my freshman year, and MySpace had gotten pretty big around that time.
Okay. All right.
By 2009, by the time, and then Facebook came back, and it used to be that you had to have a college email from all of the participating colleges to actually get on Facebook. So that was what had slowed the Facebook growth down. Right. The Facebook growth had actually been tampered by the fact that you couldn't get on without this college email. Because I remember having a MySpace, and there were people who were on Facebook, but they were all my college friends. And I was like, I can't get on there unless I use one of their emails. And it was all that type of thing going on. So but yeah, MySpace got big, and then it kind of died as soon as they opened the gateway for Facebook to everybody.
Right. So, but my point and I guess trying to look back historically at timeline here, I would say in a decade, the entire human race in one decade has been changed. Right. Like you said, the growth curve on this is crazy.
Unbelievable. It should keep people up at night, but it doesn't. It really should. And don't get me wrong, I love that people within a click of a button could talk to somebody in a completely different country in real time and share ideas and all. That's great. But with every action comes a reaction. And what I guess what I'm trying to say around the brilliance of a Christianity or any higher value, faith, moral structure is not to say that we should abandon science. It's to say that if you don't have the highest possible moral clarity, then science is doomed to become a weapon and a weapon of corruption. And that could even be said about the Catholic Church itself. And I'm a Catholic, but the Catholic Church has some real heresy around their own dealings with the scientific method. So, I think that's what we're looking at. And it should keep people up at night, because 10 years is a short amount of time to go from being a society that was already struggling with radical materialism, that was already struggling with a lack of faith and a lack of humanity and things of that nature. And then it just put it on, it put it on steroids, no doubt.
Yeah, it's really scary. So tell me what you're doing now.
Well, I am on the verge of starting my own podcast, so that's good. I'll be entering
All
the
right.
podcast world.
I
We're
like
we're
it.
we're yeah, we're finishing up a studio here, not in this space, but down the hallway in this office building.
Uh-huh.
So we're putting the finishing touches on a studio, so that should be something that's a central part of my life going forward. To be able to talk to the masses as much as I possibly can. Also, I have another MMA fight coming up in January, another pro MMA
Yeah.
fight. Considering taking a pro boxing fight too, because I really like boxing, and I'm showing to have a little bit of an aptitude and skill in boxing as well.
Uh-huh.
And the big three will be coming back around next summer. It always comes back around faster than you expect.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, my work with the Unity Project, I'm looking forward to diving into more. And also, obviously, the midterm elections are going to have huge implications, and we want to try and rally people to vote America. I'm not telling you to vote Republican or Democrat. I'm telling you to vote for your American citizenship, and I hope that I
Mhm.
can continue to have an influence there as well. So those are the focuses for now.
Do you think you'll run for elected office in the future?
Oh yeah, to the day I die. These people will never see that. To finish, I don't know how much time you got, but that's one of the scams too, right? Is like the prevalence of self-doubt and
Mhm.
the fear of failure and the fear of the perception of one who has failed. And that's
Mhm.
why you see a lot of these people who run for office, when they lose, they can't bear it.
Right.
They can't bear losing, and so they never run again. And they're
Mhm.
told by the middlemen and the handlers and the donors, right? They're
Right. Those
told,
85 percenters.
those 85 percenters, yeah, they're told, hey, you lost, you shot all your political capital. We could never run you again. Well, I don't have
Yeah.
any of those backers, and I don't have any of those people who advise or who
You
tell
don't
me what
strike
to do.
you don't
Yeah,
strike me as someone who would listen to it. So
yeah. So I'm just gonna keep running. It's to me, I'm trying to provide the opportunity for people in my community, but hopefully on the statewide level next election cycle, to vote for their own citizenship. And here's the reality, Laura. As much as you and I and the work that the Unity Project does and the work that many good organizations do around this country and around the world, the referendum is on the people,
that's right.
the American citizens and the free
Mhm.
people of the world. The referendum is on you. The government has not gotten this way by their own corruption. The government's dishonesty is a reflection of our willingness to accept it.
I couldn't agree more. And our willingness to really move away from any form of understanding of how this country was founded and what makes this country amazing and how this country operates. If you go out and you ask the average person, um, I believe if you go out and you ask the average person how many states there are, people would probably struggle to answer that question,
No doubt.
let alone understand the political process and what their responsibility is as a citizen. Because I really do believe it's our responsibility. Every one of us that has the privilege of being a citizen of the United States of America, we have a responsibility. And the average person is just, you touched on it, and we should probably go back to it, but this complacency because they're very comfortable,
Yeah.
and because of that, people have moved away from any thought of what is my responsibility, because that might include getting a little uncomfortable.
Well, we are victim. Our society is become a victim of two very distinct problems. We have traded our freedom, the freedom we were intended to have as American citizenships, that our
Mhm.
founding fathers, although flawed, were very brilliant in their insight and intuition towards the concept of American freedom.
Mhm.
Everybody goes back and goes, well, George Washington had slaves. There's a difference between ideas and the application thereof.
Right.
And, that's one of the first philosophical snafus that people fall into when they
Mhm.
listen to these communist, Marxist, mainstream media organizations.
Right.
But in that concept of freedom, the American freedom we're supposed to have, it's fallen victim to two very distinct problems: our desire for freedom and our love for radical materialism. We've traded
Yeah.
our freedom for security and materialism.
Right.
And the security, you could say, is the bait, and the
Mhm.
material. I mean, the security. Yeah, the security is the bait, and the materialism is the hook.
Right. Yeah.
So they get you feeling as though the only way you can be safe, The only way you can live and continue to prosper as an individual is if the government protects you.
That's
You
right.
know, our government, our security state, our Department of Defense, the CIA, the NSA, the DOD, the FBI, now the IRS, the 87,000
right.
IRS agents, they're all there to protect you,
Right.
right? They're there
Well,
to make sure,
sure,
right?
we've seen recently what kind of protection that the FBI is willing to give as they're beating down the doors of
That's
people
right.
that
That's right.
are being just a cog in this weapon that's being created. But yeah, it's fascinating, right? Like, not only are these being weaponized, but you heard Biden say it himself, that if the American people essentially, and I'm paraphrasing, of course, but
Yeah.
if the American people aren't willing to go along and support this, and if anyone were to, God forbid, get the idea in their mind that they themselves are part of the government, because right, it's a government of we the people, then President Biden has F-16s. I think it was F-16s or F-15s. I'm not sure, can't remember, but that statement in and of itself, to me, was probably singularly one of the most terrifying statements I have ever heard an elected official, let alone a sitting president of the United States, say.
100%.
Directly threatened the people of this country.
100%. He basically put the cap on a 60-year a 60-year runway to erode what it means to be an American citizen and the safety and protection therein. And the message was clear. The message was, if you think your Second Amendment is what keeps your freedoms,
That's right.
you're wrong. Actually, your rifles, your hunting rifles, will pale in comparison to our F-16s as the government, and we are above you. We are above you, and if you step out of line, we are not beyond the idea of using those F-16s to secure our own power. And people, they let it go, and mostly because they're getting high, and secondarily, and this is why I said it, it's not even because they're getting high. They are getting high, and it's easy to let things go when you get high. That's number one. But they're letting it go because they would much rather have a corrupt tyrant be their protector than have to secure their own freedom.
That's right.
And that's how it always goes. Is, oh, well, I'll take a corrupt king as long as his power and his corruption and his control over the thing allows me to sit at home and get high and jerk off, then I don't care how corrupt he is. I have at it.
Because they're comfortable, right? And someone said to me, it's a famous statement, but someone, to the effect of, you have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable.
No doubt.
And we have lost that idea. And I just, in that moment, I just was thinking, I wonder how this must have been a little bit how the founding fathers felt when the government of England at the time was, being authoritative over them. So it's all fascinating. I don't know. We're going to see where this all ends up, but I do feel inspired.
Here's the scariest one for me. The scariest one I saw was when the new replacement for Psaki, the young Black woman who is now the press secretary for the White House, got up before the American people as a Black woman and said, if you are not in alignment with the majority of thinking in this country, then we consider that to be extreme. So, and this is how cross and incongruent it gets. And this is all people have to look at to understand that the time is long past for them to step up and get involved. So all minorities are extreme. They're extremists.
That's right.
But the LGBTQ isn't. Right.
Of course not.
If you have a thought or a belief about gender theory or sexual preference or sexual politics that's in the minority, which it is. I mean, the LGBTQ movement and their ideologies about science and just the physical real world is a minority belief. Then you would be considered an extremist, but not to them. It's rules and thoughts and ideas by our own application and nothing else. Make it up as we go.
Right. Well, I mean, look, in the state of California, because I believe that a child should not be genitally mutilated
Yeah.
at the age of 8, 10,
Yeah.
15. I am considered, by the definition of the federal government, I am now considered someone who's radical.
An
Because,
extremist.
right,
Yep.
right.
Yeah.
And, but I am inspired, though. I do think we're starting to see movements toward people waking up and getting more involved and realizing that they can't sit on the sidelines. And so I am inspired. I do think that the pendulum is starting to move in the opposite direction. Do you
Well,
feel inspired sometimes?
listen, we should be reasonable in managing our expectations as freedom fighters. We don't need everybody. We don't need everybody.
That's right.
We need a brave few, and a brave few.
Right.
They want you to believe that they have weaponized the idea of democracy and the
Right.
result of a consensus or a manufactured consent as being the standard bearer or for societal change and movement. That's not reality. That's never been
Right.
reality. That's a scam that they're running to maintain power. A brave
Right.
few people always has a dying shot at doing good, and that's where our expectations need to lay. All we need to do is keep waking up as many as possible, and those people show up to the fight every day,
Right.
and everything else will take care of itself. And in the event that you die before you see what you wanted done, then you should feel so lucky. I mean, we should be
Right.
so lucky as to meet a righteous, untimely death like that.
Well, that's such a good point about not needing everyone. And of course they want, you say the people that are pushing this agenda, they want you to feel like you're isolated, right? We talked about that. It's actually one of their tactics. It's in their playbook. But if you look, to your point, historically at historical events across time, and probably most recently, and one of the most famous one is the American Revolution. And
Yeah.
I think people believe that everyone was involved in the American Revolution who lived in the United States of America at that time, right? As the country was forming. And I read a book, and I was listening to a speech that less than 10% of the population at that time was actually involved in the American Revolution.
Right. Right.
It's amazing.
Yeah, I mean,
It's amazing.
it's always a brave few. We in the social media and the look at me generation, we've been conditioned to believe that, and even let's just say after World War II, right? After again, to go back to the beginning, this whole post World War II democratic liberal order is made to convey one message. If you don't have the overwhelming support of a democratic consensus, you're an extremist, and there's nothing you can do to have any governance or any control over your life, and certainly not the institutions that preside over it. And that's just fundamentally not true. Not only is it corrupt, it's a lie. And what America was founded on, or what people think, I think when they say make America great again, was the cultural value of the rugged individualist, right? The cultural value of a man having everything he needs on his tool belt, right? On his belt. And that has nothing to do with race. That's not a connotation about going back to a time when race relations were more openly unfair and unpleasant, or going back to slavery. That's just a gimmick. No, there was a time in this country briefly after the Civil Rights Act, in the 70s, before Nixon, who is the sine qua non of globalist uniparty shills, and Kissinger, before they got into office and did their great New Deal with China, there was a time right in there for about 10 years where the race feud had died somewhat. It had dissipated. There was a unity. You could see that in the music that came out of the 70s, right? In that sort of disco / hippie generation, where people were like, the music was really conveying that the ideas about race had changed. But we were still the head of the manufacturing world.
That's right.
There was a moment right in there where racial unity had come to a head for American history, and we were the manufacturing powerhouse in the world.
Right.
And right as it started to happen, they took the manufacturing out and they let the people go back on to dissipate it back into racial feud. And it wasn't by accident.
Right. Well, and I like what you were just saying too about like the value in masculinity. And I think in society today, look, we hear about toxic masculinity.
Yeah.
There's the feminization of men. And I think that is so dangerous in a society. There's absolutely value and celebration in strong, good men. And I know we've worked with Matt Boudreau, who works with Tim Kennedy,
Yeah.
and they have an organization called Apogee, and it's all about mentoring men and mentoring them into being good fathers,
Yeah.
and just good men. And I think it's a really, really dangerous, slippery slope when you start tearing down men in society just for being men.
Again, it goes back to this crisis of faith, and I don't mean to beat people over the head with the Bible. I'm not a Bible thumper by any means. I was born and raised a Catholic on both sides of my family, both sides being my Black heritage and my Mexican heritage, and actually my Norwegian family were Christians as well. So but I'm not trying to beat people over the head with the Bible, but people have to understand that the natural order, the concept of the natural order in Christian faith is one that lays out as a blueprint for the role between men, women, and the overall collective family, and in that relationship to God. And so, it's not by accident that the communists were anti-God. And it's not by accident that the communists and the Marxists always go after women as a kick stop, or let's say a kick start for revolution, to say, hey, you women don't have it fair. It's not fair for you guys. This isn't equal. And then there's this delineation of other identity politic groups that come under the banner and the hedge of women versus men. And so, that has been prevalent throughout all of the Marxist communist revolutions in history, and it's just as prevalent today. And the war on men is as prevalent as it's ever been. The real sad part and concerning issue for me as a man looking out is there's always other men that aid and abet it. And it's so corrupt. I mean, it's like, guys, have some dignity, have some self-respect. You guys are only going along with this communist Marxist stuff so you can get laid. And that, I mean, that is, no, honestly. And, as a man, it's like, have some pride, right?
Right.
I mean, they've made porno so prevalent that you already get the jerk off for free. Okay. You don't have to go and put yourself way out over your own skis to be sucking up to some corrupt feminist movement just to get laid and to have that companionship. That's the original Adam and Eve story. And that's where faith becomes so important, because even between man and woman, the fundamentals of being human, back to the start, you still have to have a relationship to a higher value and power, or the person next to you will corrupt you. And that could be men corrupted women or women corrupted men, both ways. But right now, the communist movement and the Marxist movement are hedging their bets that they can destabilize a powerful and strong America by saying that we're just not women friendly. And it's like, this whole thing was built for white women. I don't even understand the claim.
Well, as a white woman, I can tell you that there has never in human history been a civilization that is more opportunity giving and supportive of women than the United States of America present day. Now it's changing. That's the other thing, right? People don't realize that a lot of what's happening, whether it's the transgender movement, the gender ideologies, that's actually changing. And you're seeing some harm come to to women. But
major.
Yeah. But
look at automate. They're not being shy about it. Look at the whole idea with the fourth industrial revolution and the Great Reset is this, this open admission that automation is the way of the future. And when you look at the American workforce and you go, well, where are a lot of the women's jobs going to fall by the wayside? It's all of it's store clerks, right? I was in a Target this morning buying a laundry bin, and there was a woman who had to be about 65 years old who seemed like she had a little bit of a disability, working right there as a store clerk. Jeff Bezos and those guys, they want to take every single store clerk out of the stores,
Right.
out of the grocery stores, out of the retail stores. So you got store clerks, you got administrators, right? You got judicial clerks, which women occupy a lot of. You have I mean, there's just a number of jobs that they're openly saying we're taking those jobs away from women, and women aren't even standing up to say stop.
No, what's happening is you have women that are standing up to say that a biological male should who now feels as though they are a woman should be able to compete against a biological woman in a sport. You're a professional athlete. Can you imagine
MMA.
having
MMA too. I mean, just the most dangerous sports too. I mean, it's just unfair from a fundamental standpoint. And you look at tennis, look what Serena, even, us athletes, we can admit the truth and the difference and separation between men and women, because most of us grew up at some time playing or competing against one another. And then you got to a certain age where it's like, why would we even do it anymore? It's not, there's no fun to it. There's no competition. You would only do it in a setting that's meant to be informal, right? It's meant to be casual. Like I go to the court and shoot horse with my sister, but we're not going to play a full-fledged game of physical one-on-one because it's ridiculous. And so, us athletes usually can admit that, but even us athletes have been gagged and hogtied and forced into this cultural narrative and dogma about this whole transgender and gender theory. And I thought it was absolutely ridiculous to allow a man to swim with women and to take the opportunity for those women, all the work they put in over their whole life.
Well,
I mean, if I just went to the WNBA, if I decided today to become a woman and go into the WNBA, or let's say I became a female volleyball player, I would be taking a spot away from a woman. So I don't get how that benefits women. I just don't understand.
Well, what about the violent fight, right? There was that MMA, then it was a biological male fighting against a biological woman.
And he cracked her head. He cracked her skull.
Right.
Yeah, cracked her skull, right? I mean, that, for people who don't realize, because they don't watch MMA or they think it's too brutal or whatever, people get their faceplate broken some, that happens, eye socket fractured. Most of the fights that doesn't happen, but people break bones, but people don't get their skull broken. Okay, this guy literally fractured the strong part of her cranium. And that's what happens when a man with a man frame comes down with the brute force on a skeletal structure that doesn't have the same build. And men were never supposed to fight women, biologically speaking. And that's why even in the old days, for the most part, when one army came in and subjugated another army, they took the women as the women and children, except the real but my forebears, the Norwegians, the Vikings, the Danes, and these people were straight savages. They come in and kill anybody unfit to work. But for the most part, civilized societies, took the women and children as slaves, because there's no honor in killing a being that's vulnerable. And we've lost that too, right? And it's what you see with the vaccine and the COVID narrative. And really it's what you see with the abortion narrative. I know that's the touchy topic, but the abortion was the predicate for the child vaccination. The abortion was to say, hey, you're not alive if you're in the womb. And now it's like, well, are you really alive if you're 5 years old? And pretty soon it's going to be, are you alive if you're 75? And then they're openly saying, hey, you should be able to euthanize an elder.
Well, I mean, listen, what is it? 2223 in California, I think, I'm looking at Lynn here because she's our producer. I think it's 2223 that says that it's 30 days after birth. Is that right? 28 days after birth. I mean, an autonomous human being, I've got some thoughts, but that's for a different time, a different podcast. But it's part two. That's right. But and I've had so much fun today. This conversation has just taken so many topics on, and I am so thrilled with you as a person, the
Thank you.
work that you're doing. Well, let's end by saying, first of all, how can people follow the work that you're doing
Yeah.
and support you?
Well, I'm on every social media platform for now. I'm a storm the castle type of crazy. So I just recently signed on to TikTok and was talking about the CCP and stuff on
Ah,
there. So I'm on
oh my
every
gosh.
social.
Part two, we're going to talk about the CCP then.
Yeah, yeah, oh yeah, that needs its own episode. But yeah, so I'm on every social media, and that's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Getter, True Social. I'm on LinkedIn still, and until they kick me off, I'm on YouTube, and my podcast will be on YouTube shortly. So if you stay in touch with my social media, you'll start to see the advertisements for my podcast pop up there. And I'm also on Substack. I spent a lot of time writing a number of very lengthy pieces, in-depth pieces about a number of these cultural issues, and a long written format on Substack, and it's completely free for people to read. So
So, and what we'll do is link your Substack on our
thank you.
website so people
Thank
can also access it there. And when you get your podcast up and going, we'll link it on our website as well. We want to make sure that we highlight the work that you're doing. I just think that you're a really amazing individual, and I would say for everyone as well, go look up his fights. I'll be cheering you on. I think
Thank
it's
you so much.
fantastic.
I got to have
Thanks
you
for
on my podcast when we get up and
I'm
running.
ready. I'm
Yeah,
ready.
can't wait.
Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Laura. Godspeed.
From all of us at the Unity Project, thank you for listening to today's podcast. We hope to continue producing content that amplifies voices, strategies, and resources. Please keep in mind that the Unity Project is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that relies on the contributions of our generous supporters to fuel the work we do in this movement. If you value our efforts, please consider making a tax-deductible contribution today by visiting our website at www.unityproject.com and clicking the donate button. We very much appreciate your continued support and confidence, without which our work wouldn't be possible.